When I was 23, I took a solo trip to the Colorado backcountry. It wasn't my first time hiking alone, but it was my most ambitious trek yet, a 3-day loop through remote mountain terrain, miles from the nearest road. I had packed carefully. Enough food, a satellite phone, emergency supplies, but nothing could prepare me for what happened on the second day. The morning was crisp, the sky a cloudless blue. I broke camp early, eager to cover as much ground as possible before the midday sun made the climb unbearable. The trail was rugged, winding through dense pines, then breaking into open rock fields. It was in one of those rock fields that I made my mistake. A boulder about the size of a suitcase sat loose among smaller rocks. I stepped on it, testing its stability, but the moment I shifted my weight forward, it moved. The world seemed to tilt. My foot slipped. My ankle twisted at an unnatural angle, and I fell hard. My left leg slammed against another rock with a sickening crunch. The pain was instant and blinding. I knew immediately something was wrong. My shin was twisted in a way it shouldn't be, and the pain was unlike anything I had ever felt. I gasped, clutching at my leg, but even the slightest movement sent fresh waves of agony through me. I tried to control my breathing, but my body was already drenched in sweat, my vision darkening at the edges. I was alone. Truly, completely alone. There was no cell service out here, and my satellite phone, my emergency lifeline, was in my pack, about 6 feet away. An easy reach under normal circumstances, but at that moment, an impossible distance. Panic set in, not immediately, but in creeping waves. I tried to drag myself forward, but every movement sent fresh agony up my leg. I screamed into the empty wilderness, knowing no one would hear me. My breath came in short, ragged bursts, my pulse hammering in my ears. I forced myself to think. I wasn't going to die here. I couldn't. I reached for my water bottle, my fingers barely brushing it before knocking it over. It rolled away, and I let out something between a sob and a growl. My body felt like it was shutting down, overwhelmed by pain and shock. I closed my eyes, trying to slow my thoughts. I had to get to my pack. The next 10 minutes, or maybe it was an hour, I couldn't tell, was spent inching myself forward. I used my elbows, dragging my body over jagged stone, my broken leg trailing uselessly behind me. By the time I reached my pack, my arms were trembling, my body slick with sweat and dirt. My fingers fumbled as I tore open the bag, searching blindly until I felt the cool metal of my satellite phone. I hit the emergency call button. Nothing happened. I stared at the screen, my brain sluggish to process what I was seeing. No signal, not even a weak connection. I turned the device off, then back on, praying it was just a glitch. But it wasn't. I was too deep in the valley, surrounded by thick trees and towering rock faces. My emergency lifeline was worthless. The realization settled over me like a weighted blanket. My options were limited. Stay here and hope someone found me before the cold set in, or try to move. Neither choice felt good, but I knew if I stayed in one place too long, I'd go into shock. I had to try. I crawled. Every movement was torture. My leg dragged uselessly behind me, the bones shifting in ways that made me want to vomit. The sun was sinking lower, shadows stretching across the landscape. My water was almost gone. I had no appetite, but I forced myself to eat a protein bar, knowing I'd need the energy. I lost track of time. I only knew that I had to keep going. The world narrowed to the sound of my own ragged breathing, the sharp pain of every movement, the dull throb of my body shutting down. When I finally saw something man-made, a rusty old hunting stand at the edge of the tree line, I almost thought I was hallucinating. There was no one there, no supplies, no shelter, but it meant I was getting closer to civilization. I found a sturdy branch and used it as a makeshift crutch, forcing myself upright. My vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges, but I stayed on my feet. One step, then another. I don't know how long I walked. Long enough that I stopped feeling pain, which scared me more than anything. My body was shutting down, the cold creeping in. I wasn't going to make it. That thought settled deep in my chest, a quiet, resigned thing. Then I heard the engine, a low rumble, distant but growing. I turned, dizzy and weak, and saw the headlights bouncing along the trail. An old pickup truck moving slow, searching. I tried to wave, but my arms felt like lead. My knees buckled. The last thing I remember was the crunch of tires on gravel, the sound of doors slamming, voices shouting. I woke up in a hospital bed. They told me a hunter had found me, that I had been less than an hour from a small ranger station when I collapsed, that I had lost so much blood and was so dehydrated that if I had been out there another night, I probably wouldn't have survived. I still dream about it sometimes, the silence, the helplessness, the way the world seemed to close in as if I were already dead and the universe was just waiting for my body to catch up. I haven't been back to the backcountry since. Maybe I never will. I'd chosen Buckskin Gulch precisely because no one else would be here. It was late November, the off-season for hikers, and the forecast had promised rain, a death sentence in these narrows where flash floods could drown you in minutes. But I'd been desperate to outrun the noise, the breakup, the layoff, the suffocating ache of existing in a world that felt like it had stopped wanting me. The ranger at the trailhead had eyed my solo permit like it was a suicide note. "You got a satellite phone?" he'd asked skeptically. I lied and said yes. Now wedged between two blood-red walls of sandstone, I clawed at the rock face, trying to hoist myself upright. The first thing I felt was the crack, a sickening wet pop that shuddered through my ankle like a gunshot. My boot caught between two jagged teeth of limestone, and for a split second, the world tilted sideways, the sky swapping places with the canyon floor. Then I was down, my knee buckling sideways as my weight crumpled onto it. The pain was immediate, volcanic, radiating up my leg in waves that turned my vision gray. I screamed, but the sound dissolved into the vast, indifferent silence of the Utah desert. No echo, no reply. Just the dry wind hissing through the slot canyon, carrying away my voice like it was nothing. My left leg refused to hold weight. Each attempt sent fresh lightning up my shin, and I collapsed again, panting, my fingers raw and bleeding. The canyon was a labyrinth, barely 3 feet wide in places, the sky reduced to a thin blue thread far above. I'd hiked 7 miles in, 7 miles from the nearest trailhead, 7 miles from anyone who might hear me. I'd read about survival stories, hikers who'd amputated limbs with pocket knives, drunk their own urine, gnawed on pack straps to stave off hunger. But those were stories, polished by hindsight and the smug certainty of survivors. Reality was messier. My water bladder was half full. My phone had no signal. My emergency whistle hung useless around my neck, its shrill blips swallowed by the stone. I fumbled for my backpack, spilling protein bars and a first aid kit into the dirt. No splint, no painkillers, just band-aids and antiseptic wipes, laughably inadequate. Time blurred. The sun crawled westward, striping the canyon in shadows that deepened to purple. Cold seeped into my bones. I tried dragging myself forward, using my elbows to crawl, but the uneven terrain tore at my palms, and every movement jostled my ankle, threatening to pull me under again. At one point I heard voices, faint, garbled, and my heart lurched. I screamed until my throat shredded, only to realize it was the wind, funneling through a crevice somewhere above, mimicking human speech. The desert was a ventriloquist. Nightfall was a slow suffocation. Temperatures plummeted. I curled into my jacket, shivering, my breath fogging in the beam of my headlamp. The darkness amplified every sound, the skitter of pebbles, the rustle of some unseen creature. A snake? A rodent? The low guttural groan of shifting rock. Once I jerked awake to the sensation of fingers brushing my hair, just a spider dangling from its silk, but the terror lingered, primal and sticky. I'd never felt so watched. By dawn, the pain had mutated into a dull, perpetual throb. My mouth tasted like copper. I sipped water sparingly, rationing, though I knew it wouldn't matter. Dehydration would kill me slower than the cold. I thought about my ex, how he'd accused me of being reckless. "You're always chasing some feeling," he'd spat during our last fight. I wondered if he'd mourn me, or just feel vindicated. On the second day, the hallucinations began. Shapes flickered at the edges of my vision. A figure standing at the end of the corridor, motioning me forward, a child's laughter bouncing off the walls. Once I swore I saw my mother, her face pale and reproachful, mouthing words I couldn't hear. By afternoon, the sky darkened. Rain. Panic surged. I'd seen the flood videos, churning walls of debris-laden water, but the storm never reached me. Instead, the temperature spiked, the air thickening with humidity. My ankle swelled against my boot, the skin mottled and hot. Infection, probably. I debated cutting the laces, relieving the pressure, but the thought of seeing the damage, bone jutting through skin, made me gag. I'd stopped trying to move, conserving energy, though for what I wasn't sure. Hope was a dying ember. Then on the third morning I heard it, a drone, high-pitched and mechanical, buzzing somewhere overhead. I thrashed, screaming, waving my arms like a madwoman. The sound faded. Came back, faded again. They were searching, but the canyon's twists hid me. I grabbed my emergency blanket, the foil crinkling loudly, and hurled it toward a sliver of open sky. It caught the light, flashing silver, a distress signal. The drone's buzz sharpened, slicing through the canyon's throat. I strained to track it, neck aching, my throat too raw to scream again. The foil blanket fluttered, snagged on a thorny juniper branch 20 feet above me. A fragile, gleaming flag. "See it?" I begged silently. "See it, see it, see..." The sound retreated. I slumped, tears carving hot tracks through the dust on my face. But then a new noise, rotors thrumming, closer, louder. A helicopter. Voices echoed, warped by the labyrinth. Signal. North Fork. Adrenaline burned through the haze of pain. I grabbed my whistle and blew 3 sharp shrieks, SOS, though each breath felt like inhaling glass. Boots scuffed rock above. A man's voice clear now. "Down here." A figure rappelled into view, backlit by the white glare of midday. The ranger. His face tightened when he saw me. "Christ," he muttered, kneeling to brace my leg. They strapped me into a rescue litter, the helicopter waiting atop the mesa. As they hoisted me up, the canyon yawned below, its red jaws streaked with the first threads of rain. The helicopter lurched as rain slapped the windows. They told me later I'd been lucky. The infection hadn't reached bone. The fracture would heal, but the despair I felt in those days will never fade. I'll remember it forever.